We've got a power pack 60 minutes of Oklahoma football talk for you right here at the Voice of College Football. So lock it in. Please hit the like button before you get settled and talk to us concerning Oklahoma football. So much to get to. So no catchy punchlines to start the show. We're going to dive right into football talk with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. He's made this a mainstay every week with you, 66 consecutive weeks. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mark. As you mentioned, there's tons going on with football in general, with recruiting kind of. And then we got the All Big 12 stuff, and then positional preview stuff going on. So it's exciting time. Lots going on.
Oklahoma fans, you may be really happy with certain things that have happened the last few months throughout the offseason, might be disgruntled about certain things, but let's keep this in mind. You could be any one of a number of fan bases out there that don't really know where your landing spot is going to be and if it's going to be in the Power Five or the Power whatever it turns out to be. So understand at least your place in college football is secure. That's one good thing. All right, couple commits over the past week. I was aware of the linebacker that came in and posted a video on his profile and rankings, but we had another commit come in here in just the last 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. So Oklahoma got the commitment out of a four-star wide receiver, Jaquazi Pettaway. Really, really good get. Probably, I think right now, as it stands, Mark, probably the second best in terms of ranking and the composite rank that Oklahoma has in the class. Number 8 wide receiver overall, top 47 in terms of the 247 composite. A really from the people that I've talked to. This was a guy that was really kind of between Oklahoma and Texas for the last few months. Oklahoma liked where they were with him as even as early as April. And then it continued to progress. Oklahoma cooled off of a couple of different other wide receivers, but Pettaway was always still in the mix for Oklahoma, and so eventually to that point, Oklahoma got that commitment on yesterday, I believe it was. So what Oklahoma's getting in Pettaway is incredible speed. I think that's the underlying factor. He's drawn some comparisons to Mario Williams in terms of what his high school tape looks like compared to what he would project to at the next level. A guy that's a game changer certainly is a guy that's good enough, certainly to play immediately next year. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen within the existing team in terms of the wide receivers that Oklahoma has right now, but certainly a guy that could factor into the return game. But a guy that will get a look, will get some time, should get some run next year as a true freshman.
Yeah, we talked three-star fatigue a couple of weeks ago. This guy certainly will not add to that. He could be the remedy, at least at the wide receiver position. Of course, you look at the numbers there, according to the 247 Sports Composite, a top 50 national recruit. Mm-hmm. There are not many of those guys, 50 of them each and every year. And the 247 specific ranking was actually higher than that at number 4 at the wide receiver position. In terms of his production in high school last year, caught 43 passes in 8 games played. So I don't know if his season was compromised by injury or COVID or what happened there, but 8 games played, 43 catches, over 17 yards per reception, 7 touchdowns. He caught 55 for over 1,000 yards a year before as a sophomore. And so highly productive wide receiver there in Texas high school football with almost 100 catches in his career, 14 touchdowns.
Yeah, Mark, he's a kid that it's really hard for players really kind of outside of the quarterback position and probably the defensive line position to move up. But this is a high 4-star kid, could potentially get up to that 5th star, at some point in the season. But as I mentioned, those players don't typically move a ton. So, but again, I think a lot of people that have been concerned, and we talked about this numerous times, through this every week, just to be patient, because July is going to be a really good month for Oklahoma recruiting wise. We've seen Hayes Fawcett even come out and tweet talk about the recruiting kind of going up and being a really big month for Oklahoma. And there's a lot of guys that are still going to announce their commitments here within the month of July, and I think overall that will be certainly continue to be a positive trend for Oklahoma recruiting into that 2023 cycle.
Appreciate everybody being here at the Voice of College Football. This is our Oklahoma show that we bring you each and every Friday at 11:30 Central Time. So get here on time and enjoy. Bring some folks with you. And also, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for the notifications. Of course, it helps us. But more so than that, when you have the notifications turned on, what it does for you is there are times in which we've got to change the show time, and you're on top of that. And then also, every time we post videos, which is just about every day, you get the notification on new content being posted to the channel. So please subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications to know specifically when we go live. So that's a couple commits. That's one in particular. There's also the linebacker who came in on July 4th.
Yeah, Phil Pachadi, I believe is how you pronounce his name. That double C, I think, makes an H sound. From everything I've been told. Yeah, 3-star, top 40 linebacker in the country. He's a guy that has the opportunity to go up. He's a rival's 4-star kid, so wouldn't be completely surprised to see this kid move from a 3 to a 4 at some point in the year. But interestingly enough, and there's another kid that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Oklahoma broadening that recruiting circle a little bit. So this is a Pennsylvania kid. There's a couple of kids that Oklahoma's in on the New Jersey area as well. So not a typical spot that you see that Oklahoma really traditionally has recruited really well. But I think, when you look at kids at the linebacker position, regardless of star, when you look at Brent Venables, his track record, if it's a guy that he likes, I think people should be comfortable. I think his track record in coaching, history in terms of the linebacker positions kind of speaks for itself. So, really good, really, I think he's a kid that looks ready, looks FBS, looks Power 5 ready from a body perspective, 6'3", 225. And even though he was a 3-star, Oklahoma got him over Auburn and Michigan. Those were the two other teams that were in the mix for him for Pachadi's services.
All right, folks, that's a couple commits from the past week, but Brent Venables and staff are not done, and I've seen this being a trend, most notably with, a number of schools that we cover here, where there was a bit of a lull after a big push in June, and then bam, over the weekend, a ton of commits came in, and there's going to be more possibly coming on the way here.
Yeah, so Oklahoma, Mark, has probably about 5 or 6 kids that are going to announce their choice throughout the month of July. So Caden Green is the offensive lineman out of Missouri City that we've talked a little bit about. So certainly, I think between Oklahoma, Missouri, and Nebraska, to a certain degree, I think had an official visit with Missouri a few weeks ago. There was some thoughts there that might have changed, but everything that I've heard, he has reaffirmed. Everybody in the Oklahoma camp here feels pretty strongly about him committing to Oklahoma today. Still has received a few crystal balls in that direction. So as we talked about him, number 12th ranked tackle in the country, top 100 overall player, and a 4-star kid. So he will announce his commitment at some point today. I believe it's this evening. Evening that he'll announce that commitment. Logan Howland is another kid that will actually announce his commitment tomorrow. Offensive tackle, 3-star, top 50 tackle in the country, 6'7", 280. As I mentioned a little bit previously in terms of Pachadi, he's a New Jersey kid, 6'7", 280. From an offensive tackle perspective, Oklahoma's in the mix. Certainly, I think they lead. Tons of crystal balls coming in for him over the last couple of days. So feel very, very good where Oklahoma sits with him. Iowa, Miami, and Michigan are probably the top contenders. It's probably, Mark, really a battle between Oklahoma and Iowa at this point for him. So another one that people have probably followed a little bit, PJ Adebare, who is a 4-star edge out of Kansas City, Missouri, 6'4", 240, 12th ranked edge in the country, top 100 overall. He's a kid I kind of had heard, a little bit of remnants about yesterday that could have possibly announced. I think he is where he hasn't really set a commitment date. From everything that I've heard, it could be any day now that he makes that commitment. And certainly Oklahoma is very, very much in the lead for him right now as well. Moving over to the offensive side of the ball, Dylan Smothers is a kid, 4-star, number 9th ranked running back in the country for in the 2023 composite out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Again, very, very heavy lean to Oklahoma. July 14th is when he will announce his commitment. And then there's another one that it's really an interesting story with this kid. This Troy Bowles, 4-star linebacker out of the Tampa area. Oklahoma, Georgia, and Ohio State are the three teams in contention. A while back he put Oklahoma in his top 8, and a lot of people were surprised that he was even in consideration. So this one, you hear some things, whether it be this chat or just in general about, Venable's ability to recruit high star kids at a high level. And, while Oklahoma may end up missing out on this kid, it is 100% Venables is the only reason Oklahoma is even in the picture right now. And the fact that Oklahoma is the top 3 is, I think it's a big testament to what the staff on the defensive side has been able to do. Not just Venables, but when you look at Miguel Chavis, when you look at Todd Bates and a lot of other things, they're in the conversations for these big time defensive linemen and linebackers that they just weren't in those conversations before, right? So I think the fact that Oklahoma's very, very much in the mix for him. So he will decide on July 16th. I think right now his camp is pretty silent just in terms of where he's going. I think he's only got one prediction here that I've seen, which is to Georgia. So I think from just kind of everything that I'm hearing, it almost feels like Oklahoma's like a hat on the table here. But at the same time, there's some kind of silent optimism in the Oklahoma camp that Oklahoma is very much in play for this kid that will commit a week from tomorrow. And then a couple of other ones just to keep your eyes on and things like that. So Derek LeBlanc, 4-star defensive lineman, number 7th ranked defensive tackle in the country, top 100 overall. It looks like it's an Oklahoma versus Florida battle right now. I think previously Florida had the lead a little bit. I think Oklahoma has made some big strides here. As of late, he will announce his commitment on July 28th. So Oklahoma's got a little bit of time on here as well with him. But he very much is in play for Oklahoma. I think as the crystal ball and the commitment, the percentage looks a little bit swaying towards the Florida side. Oklahoma has made some, as I mentioned, fantastic strides with his recruitment. And then a couple of other kids, Jordan Raynaud and Makari Vickers, both will be very interesting to see how both of these kids where these kids end up. This is an Oklahoma-Alabama battle for both of these kids. So they've not necessarily set a commitment date. Both are 4-star kids. Raynaud is a 4-star defensive lineman. Vickers is a 4-star cornerback. So I think one thing to look at with these two kids, Mark, is it's almost kind of listening to Parker and some of the OU insiders talking about him. It almost feels like, from his perspective, that whoever gets the last visit might end up getting this kid's pledge. So, it's for some of these kids, if Saban gets his hands on you twice, it's difficult to say no, right? So So I think that'll be interesting to follow, just what that looks like. And I think lastly, Mark, probably the crown jewel of this class, at least for Oklahoma, what in terms of who's not committed, is David Hicks. So David Hicks is a number one defensive lineman in the country, number 5 overall. Some people think this kid might be the best overall player in the country. I know that ranking right now belongs to Arch Manning, but specifically on the defensive side of the ball. So this is going to be wide open. It's something is going to go probably into the year. He's probably going to be a December, late November, early December pledge to wherever he goes. Obviously, Oklahoma is very much in the mix with him as well. So. And then the other thing to know is Oklahoma is having what's called a party on the Palace, or party in the Palace, on July 28th, I believe. So that's when it's shortly after the dead period kind of is over, and then recruits are allowed to visit and things like that again. So for a short period of time. So Oklahoma's bringing in don't really have a whole lot of intel just in terms of who's going to be there, but there's going to be as the break ends. So recruiting is definitely going up. I know we talked about this. Oklahoma was in the low 40s, maybe even the early 50s in terms of low 50s, I should say, in terms of where they were. Oklahoma jumped up, I believe, number 25 or number 26 overall. So things are going to continue to go well, I think. It's just as we mentioned, it's just the different philosophy that Venables has, and you can't blame him. Basically, from everything that I've heard, there's a lot of these kids that were wanting to commit early on. But Venables and staff really encourage these kids to, if you're not 100% sure that this is where you want to be right now, take your visits, come back and see if Oklahoma is still where you want to be. Certainly keeping tabs on them and talking to them and still recruiting them along the way, but don't want to be in a position where you're not quite sure. You're just committing just to commit and wants that to mean something. So I think as you see these guys, you'll see as they commit here in July and further on into the season until we get to signing day in December, that that you see a lot of these firmer commitments than you would have in maybe the March-April timeframe.
Miami just picked up the number 1 rated offensive tackle in the country, 1 or 2, depending on your service. And I checked out his huddle tape, and both of us watch way too much football and have our entire lives, but we're not scouts. I can't analyze whether the offensive lineman's taking a false step or he's letting the defensive lineman engage a little bit too much or anything like that. But you can tell when a guy just mauls people, just drives them to the ground and just flings people to the side with one arm. It's pretty easy to see. And I looking at this David Hicks, and you see the same attributes there, where it's just physical, just domination. He's that good. You're talking the number 1 player in the state of Texas, and like you mentioned, the quarterbacks are typically going to get the nod because of the value of the position. But my goodness, yeah, he might be the best player in the country. And the Texas A&M is getting the current prediction on 247 Sports, and he is out of Katy, Texas. That's one of those towns that I see pop up constantly. Katy, Texas. The kind of high school football they must be playing there is ridiculous. But he's the obvious answer to what I was just about to ask you in terms of, get this guy. This guy's the number 1 target left that they're seriously in consideration for. But you named about 6 guys, and they were all top 10 at their positions. So do you have in your mind a priority list in regards to whether it's because you've seen a few of these guys and you just really like them, or positional need, or anything that you would feel a little bit better? Again, as an Oklahoma fan, and I'm sure everybody would agree in the chat, any of them, that they're all more than welcome. They're all tremendous players. But any priorities for you there?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Hicks is the priority from a defensive line perspective, but I think Oklahoma's in on a few other to your point, top 10, top 15 defensive linemen, linebackers. I think defensive line and linebacker is probably the bit, but I think overall, Mark, when you look at this roster, I think just kind of when you think of the idea that Riley and Grinch had really in terms of recruiting more speed and less size is and now it's really a 180 with this staff is, yeah, you always want speed, right? But they're recruiting more size and more bulk, specifically on the defensive line and at the linebacker position as well. So I think really kind of just changing the athlete that Oklahoma gets into the program is really big. So yeah, I think all across the board, I would say at the defensive line and linebacker position probably are the biggest positions of need, along with probably safety. But yeah, I think you look at just the different type of athlete that Oklahoma wants to bring in under this staff, and I think it remains to be seen how well Oklahoma can do this year. In terms of the guys that they brought in. Remember, I think this staff is very, I mean, very dynamite in terms of recruiting. When you've got guys like Venables, when you got guys like Todd Bates, Ted Roof, and a lot of these guys that Oklahoma has brought in, and then you got a guy like Miguel Chavis, who is very young from a positional coach perspective. He's not. This is his first positional coach, responsibility, where he was kind of more in a support role at Clemson, and he's a guy that went and got 3 blue chippers late in this 2022 cycle when Oklahoma when this staff was assembled, in December January timeframe. So the fact that he's done a really good job, I think you have got to respect what he's done and what the staff will do. But I think really just changing what Oklahoma is recruiting, it will be big in getting all those kids at all those levels. But yeah, I think defensive line and linebacker are probably the two biggest ones.
History will tell us that the odds are overwhelming that wherever he goes to school, David Hicks, he will be drafted in 3 to 4 years. So he can go around somewhere and not necessarily get developed to the nth degree, but he's just so talented, he'll get drafted. Now, there are busts, obviously, at the 5-star level, but we're not just talking about a 5-star. We're talking about even the highest of 5 stars. But I would think Brent Venables can capitalize on, look at my resume. Look at who I've developed. I've taken 3 stars and made them first-round NFL draft choices. So, you could be a top 15 selection in the NFL draft because I know what it takes to take your raw skills and make you an elite player, because you're going to have the skills and the techniques that the next level is going to be looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing that's interesting, Mark, as you look at not only some of the kids that Oklahoma was able to get in that short period of time that the coaching staff came in, but looking at this year, they're in on a lot of these kids, as you'd mentioned, a lot of these positional kids. They're top 5, top 10 at their position. And even though you've seen what Venables has done as a defensive coordinator through his career, not only at Oklahoma, but over at Kansas State and then certainly at Clemson, but they're relatively unproven. Obviously, he's unproven as a head coach. Todd Bates has a certain amount of pedigree that he brings with him in terms of what he's been able to do, but he's unproven at the University of Oklahoma. So I think this year for Oklahoma is big in a lot of different ways. I think there's not, certainly, and we'll get to that in terms of the season, but there's not a lot of pressure, I believe, on this team just from a playoff or a national championship perspective, at least not nationally, maybe within the walls of that Oklahoma locker room, but not necessarily nationally. But at the same time, I think it's really imperative for Oklahoma to have probably a top 30 defense this year. When you look at it and say, okay, we see the struggles that this Oklahoma program has had over the last 15, 20 years, consistently being able to put together a defense that is capable of not only competing for a national championship, but winning a playoff game, and then maybe eventually a national championship. But if you see one year Oklahoma is able, and the staff is able to turn this defense around to be a top 20, a top 30, top 35 defense overall, I think that enters into the mind of some of these recruits as they're making their decision, not necessarily specifically for 2023, but 24 and beyond. That okay, we know that the staff, these coaches have done a great job other places, but now we see it, and by and large, they're doing this with other coaches, recruits, and for the most part, and so that I think that will pay dividends for this team to be able to do that, and kind of from the prospect of the proof is in the pudding.
Welcome to the Voice of College Football, our Oklahoma show that we provide for you each and every Friday. We're here at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, so lock it in. Bring some folks with you as well. They'll enjoy the conversation. Keep in mind that we've started our positional previews. We knocked out the running backs last week, quarterbacks the week before. We'll take you through the offense and the defense. There's a question coming in from Matt Bingham, so keep in mind that we will get to Clayton Smith's position. I don't know if you have a thought about he barely got on the field last year, Jason, but just Clayton Smith in the 2022 class is a near 5-star, and his prospects to be a factor this year.
Yeah, Clayton's interesting. He's a kid that I think a lot of people thought would get on the field in some capacity last year. To your point, was that guy that was a very, very high 4-star, very close to a 5-star. Athletically jumps off the tape in terms of what he's able to do. I think he's just, for whatever reason, he's just not been able to put it together consistently, on the practice field. And as you mentioned, Mark didn't really get on the field, and really kind of the same thing in the spring, right? Didn't play a whole lot. I think one guy that was much better in the spring and certainly showed that in the spring game was Marcus Stripling at the edge. So I think right now going into fall camp, you probably have a guy like Marcus Stripling who's your number one edge guy, but Clayton Smith is probably, I have him right there in the 2 deep as the backup. So certainly see him getting a little bit more playing time, and then it's just depending on what what he's able to do. Is he able to put that together consistently in the practice, on the practice field, to give the coaches some confidence that he can make these plays in the game, because everything's there. The measurables are there. He's got the foot speed. He's got the length to be a great edge rusher for Oklahoma. But can he put that together? So I would certainly believe that he'll continue to be in the mix this year, just depending on how well he's able to make plays in practice.
We've got a Discord for you where you can do what you're doing in the live chat right now, but you can do it 24/7, 365 and talk college football with all sorts of people. We got about 55 or 60 on Discord. So what you do is you go to Patreon, search MarkRogersTV, and you get all the benefits of the Patreon with my predictions coming up this fall. Maybe Jason will provide his like he did last year, as well as about 15 or 20 others, media members here. And then we get you a Discord link. You can dive into the chat, and that link guarantees that you're in every time and talk college football. Also, Tim and the boys, meaning Tim Prangley, who's always a USC guy in the chat, and all sorts of other folks that you might get along with a little bit more than Tim.
Right.
So don't let that scare you. Tim's a great guy, but USC fan is certainly taking his shots here. But they've got a like an after show get together that they do on a regular basis, or a fairly regular basis whenever they pull it together. And that's also available on Discord. So you can jump in, not just have conversations on a Discord live chat like you do here, but also jump in and talk college football with everyone. All right. I guess we should stay with the news, and hopefully we'll get to the wide receivers as well. But we'll stay with the news because the media of the Big 12 made its selections, and for I believe the first time, Jason, in 7 years, did not select Oklahoma as the number 1 team. That nod went to Baylor, and then also made their selections on first and second team All Big 12 offense and defense.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. And when you saw the All Big 12 team, the first and second team in Oklahoma, and Michael Turk was the only representative from Oklahoma on that team, you kind of got the idea that Oklahoma may not get the nod for that preseason Big 12 championship prediction by the media. So it's different, Mark. I mean, this is what we've mentioned a couple of times. Is this is a different outlook, I think, nationally on this team, and maybe even a little bit, from a localized perspective, on this team last year and over quite a few years versus this year. To your point, first time in 7 years that Oklahoma has not been picked as the top team, and it was close. It was fairly close. Baylor got the nod over Oklahoma at the number 2 spot. Oklahoma State number 3. Texas was number 4. I don't have the rest of them, at my fingertips, but certainly remember those top 4. And so, I think the top of the Big 12 is fairly wide open, right? As we mentioned, Baylor has a ton returning on the defensive side of the ball. I think early on, kind of looking at it, I think Baylor does have probably, in terms of proven, ability and production on the field. I think Baylor does have the best defense in the Big 12, certainly coming back. But I think the question is playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. Jerry Bohannon has moved over to USF. Blake Shapel, I believe that's how you pronounce Shapen.
I believe so.
Um, who got the nod in spring, and so Baylor actually has to replace a lot of their skill positions at the running back and the wide receiver spot, but their defense is going to be good enough to certainly keep them in games early on, right? So until that gets situated, and so Dave Aranda has done a really really good job at Baylor. Then you have Oklahoma State, which I'm not. I think from a preseason, I think I would probably. I know it's kind of difficult to say. I would almost flip Texas and Oklahoma State. And I think the reason I would say that, Mark, is I think when you look at what all Oklahoma State lost on the defensive side of the ball, they lost a ton due to graduation, early entrance, and just transferred, obviously with the move of Knowles to Ohio State. But you bring in a really good defensive coordinator as well. But the amount of guys that they have gone off that defensive side of the ball, and still for me, I don't have a ton of trust in Spencer Sanders to lead me to a Big 12 championship. I mean, we've seen it, over the last few years, and then, I think Texas has a lot of unproven talent. I mean, 5-7 a year ago, but I think they've got the opportunity. I certainly don't think that they'll be a 5-7 team again. But how much do they? So how much do they improve? So there's a lot of teams there that are varying in terms of got some question marks and some certainly more wide open than it has been in previous years. So, but I think overall as I mentioned, this is a much different outlook. Oklahoma's not. I would. I haven't seen a lot of preseason in terms of playoff predictions, but I would think that Oklahoma is very much on the outside looking in on many people's national playoff predictions. I think Oklahoma is probably, if I had to guess, probably in the 8 to 12 range in terms of preseason top 25. And certainly on the outside looking in at number 2 within the Big 12. So it's a little bit different. I think the one thing that's funny, at least from my perspective, and I think about this from a coaching perspective as well. Venables is he's a walking motivational speech. He is that's just the way he operates, and he automatically, after this all Big 12 team came out, it didn't take 30 minutes for him to retweet this and saying respect is earned, not given. And so, I mean, I don't know that. I mean, publicly he's not going to take it as a slight, but you better bet that he's going to use this as motivation through all fall camp to get these guys ready and get them juiced and get them excited to go. And I'm certainly behind closed doors he'll play that disrespected card with not only that but the Big 12 as well.
I think any of these ratings and rankings preseason are fun. At the same time, even the postseason all conference teams, I kind of raise an eyebrow to. especially at certain positions. So you can take your quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers in particular, and even if you didn't watch 1 minute of football, you can look at the stat sheet and give a reasonable selection. It may not be the right selection because the stats are only so much of the story and need to be put into context. But like if there's an all conference offensive lineman, and so he has that reputation. I'm a preseason first team all conference offensive lineman. And then who really knows about who's voting at the end of the year, whether he played up to those expectations? I got to think very few people in the conference really know how well did that player perform versus how much of this is just reputation, and especially in the preseason.
Right. Yeah. No. It's very much the case. I mean, I think the one thing, and here's the crazy part, Mark. I listened to a few people kind of talk about this, and I tend to agree. And a lot of the people here probably aren't going to like me for saying this, but when you look at this team coming into the season, and you look at some of these all Big 12 selections, I don't necessarily have a huge problem with it. Um, I think the one area that I would challenge is Spencer Sanders as all the Big 12. I mean, but I think to a certain degree, because I think when it's all said and done, I think you're going to see probably a couple of kids that perform better than him. If Oklahoma's going to have 9, 10, 11 win season this year, Dylan Gabriel is going to have to be really good for them, right? So, and he's going to put up a ton of stats in this Jeff Lebby offense. So, but again, he's not played a down of Power 5 football in his career. So I can see where, from a media perspective, that they don't necessarily want to put someone in that's unproven. I could even see Adrian Martinez at Kansas State, putting up of course, he's kind of got the same thing that Spencer Sanders has, is he can be great 1 minute, and then he can just, turn the ball over in rapid fashion. But you also have a kid like JT Daniels at West Virginia, that he is very, very much proven. So I think that's the one thing that you could say. I think if you're wanting to nitpick, I think probably Marvin Mims is a guy that Oklahoma people would think that might have been there as an all Big 12 wide receiver. But you look at the group there. You got Quentin Johnston from TCU. You've got Xavier Worthy from Texas, and I'm trying to think of the third one that was on there. I don't have it at the top of my head here. I can't remember, but you've got at least in those two, you've got two very solid wide receivers. There where you could see a situation where Mims was left out.
Yeah, the redshirt senior Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State.
That's right.
Yeah, he's obviously been around, but he's been very productive at Iowa State. He's one of the few guys that has a lot of production that's coming back on that team.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's bizarre. I think when you look at it at a macro level, right? When you look at the all Big 12, and Oklahoma doesn't have a single participant on the offense or defensive side of the ball. I mean, I think when you look at it at that level, like, you want to be upset. You want to be, feel like that Oklahoma got shaded a little bit. But, in terms of, just, when you start drilling down on it a little bit and start looking at the individual players, you don't have a ton of problem with it.
Yeah, if these writers are consistent, that is possible to have the second best team in the conference. So they lost the vote 17-12 to Baylor for the media selection for the Big 12 championship, had no offensive or defensive players in the first team. So that's not real consistent unless we would go to, I haven't been able to find the second and third teams if those were released.
No, it was just the first team.
It
No.
was just the first team, because if you went second and third teams, then it would make no sense unless Oklahoma was flooding the second and third teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely agree.
All right, Jason, we've got about 15 minutes. I have more than that. I don't know what your schedule looks like, but I can stay on
Yeah, I can stay on a little bit longer. Yep.
if needed, because Jason and I have been rolling out. Shoot, why should I take as much credit as Jason? Jason has been breaking down the positions here. I just add my 2 cents. We took a look at quarterbacks 2 weeks ago and running backs last week, and we'll take a look at the wide receivers. Always a strength at Oklahoma, but maybe not quite the production that is typically back. But I've seen Marvin Mims on a ton of, as you mentioned, not on this particular list on the first team, but I've seen him in a lot of national magazines, close to, maybe a second, third, or fourth team All-America selection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, at the wide receiver position, Mark, it's a position group where Oklahoma, certainly not as hard as the quarterback position, but took some hits in terms of the transfer portal with Jaden Hazelwood and Mario Williams both transferring out, going to Arkansas and USC, respectively. But yeah, I think when you look at it coming in, Marvin Mims is the guy, is the top. Certainly the top receiver production wise coming back for this team. And that's a big guy. I mean, a big get. I think a lot of people thought there was some considerations whether Marvin Mims would go elsewhere, right? With being part of the Lincoln Riley recruiting class. Some kids recruit to a coach. I mean, they commit to a coach versus committing to a program, right? So when you look at him, certainly it was a guy that Oklahoma was super, super excited to make sure that they had back into that on the screen here. Only had 5 touchdowns, but had over 700 yards. Was a big play. Was Oklahoma's best big play receiver last year. So would expect those catches to go up a little bit and his production to go up under Jeff Levy's offense. And then when you look at some of the supporting cast around him, Theo Weiss is a guy that'll certainly be a starter for this team this year. Was out last year for most of the year with with a little bit of a nagging ankle lower leg type of situation, and never really was able to make a whole lot of moves. Came back really strong in the spring, had a pretty good spring game. He's a guy that Oklahoma's going to count on. Pretty significantly hit this year for that receiver production. Jalil Farouk is another kid that hasn't had a lot of opportunity, but played really well in the spring. Had a really good game against Oregon in the last game of the season, the bowl game, and so he's a guy that's going to be expected to produce produce big for Oklahoma. You got Drake Stoops as well, who is a guy that just finds a way to get on the field, finds a way to make plays. He's not going to be the most athletic kid. He's not going to beat you with his speed, but knows how to get open and is about as sure-handed as you're going to get from a wide receiver. And then there's a couple of other guys, Mark, that will be in the mix. It'll be interesting to see how much playing time they really get. So true freshman Jaden Gibson played a lot in the spring, had a long touchdown reception kind of late in that game, in the spring game. Has the height, has the measurables that that Levy looks for in a receiver. I think 6'3", 6'4", long arms. He's a guy that can stretch the field a little bit. So he'll play. Just depending on early on how many plays he's able to make in the games. He'll certainly be part of that. Be part of that group. But then you've got another couple of kids, Brian Darby and Trayvon West, that will. I think one of those guys needs to emerge as that fourth or fifth wide receiver in this package for Oklahoma, and certainly think that one of those will. I think early on, West in the spring probably was the guy that made a little bit more noise, played a little bit more consistently. But both of those guys will be counted on to be maybe that fourth, fifth option from a wide receiver position. outside of the main guys that we talked about. But I think going in from a position group perspective, when you look at the top three, it's pretty set. Would be surprised if you saw any movement outside of Marvin Mims, Theo Weiss, Farouk, and maybe Stoops getting in that top. That when you have a 3 wide or a 4 wide set.
So the two transfers, JV and Hester comes in from Missouri, caught 12 passes there, a couple touchdowns.
Yep.
And then LV Bunkley Shelton, those are career numbers there. He had 33 catches, I believe, 2 years ago for Arizona State and didn't play as much this past season. I'll have to double check on that. Had 1 year at 33 catches, 1 at 11, and I believe one season where he didn't get on the field much. So you think those guys are just 4th and 5th options?
Yeah, I think those two are interesting, Mark. I mean, those kids didn't have the opportunity to come in and play, at all in the spring or practice in the spring, so they're relatively unknowns in terms of the Oklahoma culture. Obviously you've got LV Bunkley Shelton that has a little bit more experience than JJ Hester does. JJ Hester just played the 1 year, obviously last year at Missouri. Bunkley Shelton, as you'd mentioned, has a little bit more experience over the last couple of years at Arizona State. So they'll be in the mix. I think it'll be interesting to see how they, they certainly could be that 4th, 5th wide receiver, could push, guys like Drake Stoops, push guys like Jaden Gibson. And then certainly Darby and West, in that. So I think, just they're different guys, Mark. I think which is very interesting. When you look at Hester, he's probably more of a speedy type wide receiver. Could break the long the long play. Whereas you look at a guy like LV Bunkley Shelton, who's probably more of a possession receiver. So I think when you look at this group, Mark, top to bottom, they probably don't have, outside of Marvin Mims, at least right now, they probably don't have anyone with the top end speed and the playmaking ability of a Mario Williams from last year. But I think overall as a group, this group has an opportunity to be really, really good. And I think the one thing that you think about with this team, very much like the running backs, as we talked last week, that there's going to be a lot of running backs that get opportunities in Jeff Levy's offense. Very much the same thing from a wide receiver production perspective. You're gonna see that, and then having a guy like Dylan Gabriel to go and spread that wealth out amongst those wide receivers. I think Oklahoma's in maybe even a little bit better spot this year, at least right now in the fall, than they were last year.
So according to Athlon's, Texas has the best wide receivers in the Big 12. I think that's pretty much of a consensus thought with all their additions. Plus, Xavier Worthy was ridiculous in his first college season last year. But they've got Oklahoma at number 2. Athlon's does as a unit in the Big 12. Now, consistent with what the media went with in terms of first team, Athlon's has no one on Oklahoma's first team, or on the first team all Big 12 from Oklahoma. They've got 6 on the second team and 4 on the third team. So similar to what I had said, it only makes sense that if you're considering this to be the best or second best team in the conference, that they would, again, Athlon's consistent with the selection of no Oklahoma players on the first or second team, or the first team offense or defense. Athlon's is going, obviously, a Big 12 championship game appearance for Oklahoma, because they've got the Sooners at, these are all regular season records, 9-4. So they've got, they basically have a tie between Baylor and Oklahoma at 9-3, 6-3 in the conference, and then Baylor's going to win the conference championship game. That's Athlon's.
Yeah, it's just kind of perusing the the internet and kind of social media and YouTube and stuff like that. People that put out some of these predictions early on, I've seen, Mark, anywhere from 7-5 to 11-1. on some of these predictions. So what I will say, and we'll get into this more, what I will say, this Nebraska game early on is going to be a big swing game for this season. I think for Oklahoma, I think all, and we'll see early on, right? Nebraska plays. Gosh, it's escaping me. Northwestern, yeah, Northwestern in week 0, um, in Ireland. So if Nebraska loses that game, then I think we can say that Nebraska may be the same trajectory wise, maybe close to the same team that we've seen over the last couple of years. But they go win that game, and I think they've got a couple of games where that's winnable, going into that game with Oklahoma. So if Oklahoma is able to go on the road and win that game, and what's going to be a first for the first road game for Venables and staff, the first tough test, right? I mean, Oklahoma's got UTEP and Kent State, which they're not. They're not FCS teams, right? But they're not super high end. At least, especially this year, group of 5 teams. So you go and you win that game. I think you set yourself up to potentially going into Texas being undefeated. But you lose that game, and then certainly you've got some work to do throughout the year. And what I've seen early on, Mark, from a spread, I think Oklahoma's like a 2 or 3 point favorite right now. Obviously that can change, certainly kind of depending on how things go. But I think right now Vegas thinks that both of these teams, certainly you put a little bit of stock into obviously the home field advantage for Nebraska in that game. But you think right now that most people think that Oklahoma is probably slightly less than a touchdown team better than Nebraska. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that certainly how that plays out early on in the season, leading up to that game in Lincoln.
It will be. Nebraska's one of the bigger wild cards for me this season, because if you watch them from week to week, they challenged everybody they played, but they also found a way to lose, and that's been what Scott Frost has done ever since he stepped on campus, is lose 1-score games. He's got the national lead by a pretty good margin in losing games by 1 score. Well, they started their season last year against what turned out to be, they weren't a horrible team, but not a very good Illinois team, and they found a way to lose that game. And then a couple weeks later, they're playing Oklahoma, and I think the spread might have been 8 or 10, something like that. It wasn't outrageous, but Oklahoma was the better team on the field, but not significantly. They won by a score. It wasn't like Nebraska had the ball in the red zone to take the lead, but it still wasn't an impressive showing by Oklahoma. And then, of course, turned out to be, along with the Tulane game, a precursor of what most of the season was going to be for OU, and also a precursor for Nebraska, that they can play. One of the oddest stats of the season among many for Nebraska was that they actually had a point differential that was even in the Big Ten. They scored exactly as many points as they gave up, and they went 1-8. So how is that possible? Well, they beat Northwestern by 7 touchdowns, and they lost everybody else by 49 points. They lost everybody else by 6 points. Basically everybody. They lost every game by 1 score. The Ohio State game was technically 2 scores, 9 points, but if you watch the game, it was 23-17 with like a minute left. It was in doubt. They played everybody. The game was in doubt, and they figured out how to lose. Now, Northwestern's going to be no world beater this year. I don't think they're going to rebound to be a really good team like they have in the past. I think they're going to be pretty bad again. So Nebraska, I'm not going to raise the bar to say that they should go out across the ocean and annihilate Northwestern to show me something, but they should show that they're decidedly the better team. They should win by a couple touchdowns. They should, over Northwestern.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, yeah, I would feel the same way, Mark. And when you look at, I was trying to remember their early schedule. They got North Dakota, and then Georgia Southern on top of those games. So at the absolute worst, you're looking at 2-1, but certainly should be 3-0 going into that game. And so yeah, it's a big swing game for both sides. And I get you. I'm with you on this on the Nebraska side. I think Casey Thompson's a little bit of an upgrade over Adrian Martinez. But Casey Thompson's really only got one year, as a true starter, and he wasn't, the starter for the entire year last year. So, the Nebraska team, very, very much like Oklahoma, Mark, has, the winner of this game has a decent opportunity to make a nice run here early in the season. When you look at Nebraska, if they were to win that game over Oklahoma, they come back after a bye week and they host Indiana. Then they go to Rutgers. So you could very much see a potential 6-0 start for Nebraska if they win that game. So and like I said, very, very much the same way for Oklahoma. So I think this is probably the biggest game, I would say, on both teams' schedule, at least for the first half of the season.
Nebraska, and this is no Nebraska show, but one more note on them. Their Ohio State, Michigan State games have been replaced with Rutgers and Indiana. So they've got a substantially easier road than they had to face Ohio State, Michigan State in the other division last year. All right. Good stuff. Appreciate everybody being here on our Oklahoma show that we provide you every Friday at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 where it counts. And Jason Ray makes this work on Last Word on College Football. Is there anything over on the site to check out these days?
Yeah, so what we're really going to do here, probably in the next week or two, we typically do a way too early 2022 Heisman prediction poll, as we do a weekly one obviously every week during the season, but we do one here probably over the next couple of weeks. We'll do one, but then we start getting these season previews, positional breakdowns, and stuff going on. So there's a lot. We're getting close, Mark. We're officially in the last month with no college football for a while, so we're getting close into that. A lot of those previews and stuff like that. And before we go, there's been a ton of chats here. I just to talk about this, and I know a lot of, I try to be. I'll take off my crimson colored glasses when I talk through this, and a lot of people probably aren't going to want to necessarily hear this, but like the people that are in the camp that USC is only going to win 5 or 6 games, you're wrong. I mean, you're I would be shocked when you look at this. When you look at the schedule, this is, I think, probably they've got some holes on the defensive side of the ball. That's no doubt in my mind, particularly on the back end. But this USC team, I would be shocked if they're not top 5 offensive team in the country, with the amount of weapons that they have on offense. When you look at Caleb Williams, when you look at Travis Dye, when you look at Mario Williams, when you look at Jordan Addison, when you look at they had one of the best, not one of the best, a pretty decent offensive line last year, right? I think probably one of the better ones in the Pac-12, and they return a ton of those guys. And like I said, they've got some holes, particularly in the back end. I think that's going to cause them some problems, but that they've got an opportunity. Just looking at their schedule, Mark. I mean, you can look at. I mean, when you look at Rice, I mean, that's a win. When you look at, hosting Arizona State, hosting Washington State, those are 2 more wins. Then you got Arizona, Cal, Colorado. You've got 5 pretty much automatic wins that you don't really even have to consider or think about it. Then you've got Stanford and early on, Fresno State early on, at Oregon State. So the only games that I think, honestly, that you look at coming in that you would say they're going to be underdogs in is certainly at Utah when they go to Salt Lake City. I think Utah's probably a pretty consensus top 8, top 10 team in the country. this year, and then kind of depending on what Notre Dame is at this point. So I think it sucks for Oklahoma fans that want so badly to see USC fall on their face, particularly here year one. And they certainly could, but I think this is probably from a prediction perspective. I think this is anywhere from a 8 to 10 win team this year. I don't think they're a playoff team. I don't think they're a national championship contending team for the reasons that Oklahoma wasn't. They're not as good as they need to be on the defensive side of the ball, but they're going to put up points in bunches.
For this entire run under Clay Helton, their defense has been like sprinkled with stars, like great players, but never really good. Like didn't have enough depth, didn't have enough coaching, continuity, all those things. Their defense was awful last year, horrible, like bottom 2 to 3 in the Pac-12. However, you almost can't even transition those stats. You can't, to a certain extent, like you would with most teams, say, okay, Oklahoma had this level defense last year. They lost these guys. They recruited these guys. These guys should develop. Okay, we can make a estimation that they should roughly have about the same level defense. USC went out. They patched it up about as much as you can in one off season. They went out and got Bryson Shaw, who was a starting safety at Ohio State, albeit not a good one. So he basically saw the writing on the wall, and that he had gone from like stopgap emergency starting safety at Ohio State and was second on the team in tackles to I'm not going to play this year. But anyway, he's got 13 games under his belt in the Big Ten, and he's a decent player. Eric Gentry was one of the all Pac-12 freshmen at Arizona State as a rush end outside linebacker. They picked him up. He's a really good player. Shane Lee started at Alabama 2 years ago as a linebacker, had almost 100 tackles for loss, really good player. They picked him up. And then there's a few other ones. Latrell McCutcheon seems to be as though he's going to be in the rotation at corner from Oklahoma. Just the number of guys that they picked up on defense that I think is going to make them serviceable on defense.
Right. Yep.
So
I agree. I agree 100%. I mean, you probably go into the season and thinking that you got teams like Oregon and probably Utah that are, and maybe not even Oregon, but at least Utah is the favorite coming in, certainly. But I think USC is very much in that discussion, as much as people probably hate to hear that.
So before we let everyone go, also wanted to get on here. There we go. It's on Jason's Twitter page. Also, it's here on our community page here at the Voice of College Football. We wanted to supplement our position group previews with a poll, and we'll do that again with the wide receivers, but wanted to show everyone what we have on the on the running backs from last week. I'll share it here in a second. So we got about 604 votes on the community page here, and I need to blow that up, I guess. So that's what we're looking at right there. 604 votes. Who will be Oklahoma's leading rusher in 2022? So you can still vote. It's still going to tally the results, but Eric Gray with a slight lead over Marcus Major, with Javonte Barnes right there as well. And of course, Gavin Sawchuk just coming to camp in August.
So just some additional intel that I got kind of on this group. The one thing, I kind of, as we talked about this, and very similar with how the voting, I think a lot of people think that, the Sawchuk may play some, but, maybe on the outside looking in, maybe play his 4 games in redshirt or something like that. The things that I've heard is I've heard he's doing really, really well through the summer conditioning, and is probably, if not the fastest guy on the team, the fastest guy in that running back room. So we'll see how that. I mean, I think it'll be interesting early on in the fall camp to see how well he's kind of has learned the offense and things like that. But I thought that was interesting to pass along. So I think Oklahoma's got about 4 or 5 very, maybe even 6 capable running backs this year, where it's much different proposition than where I think Oklahoma was at last year at this time.
Jason's poll, the same poll, I just took it straight from him, is pretty much showing us the same thing. Let me blow it up here. 40% for Eric Gray, Devontae Barnes right behind Marcus Major. So roughly the same results right there. So you can vote still, I believe, on Jason's. It might be no final results for Jason. We still have the poll open on the community page here on our Oklahoma channel, so you can vote there if you'd like, and we'll post a similar poll. Whatever Jason figures out for the wide receivers, we will follow along and duplicate the poll here as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, we've got I was trying to pull it up real quick here to see where we're at on the wide receivers as well. Sorry, just one second. So we've got Marvin Mims right now at 67%, and then Farouk's fairly behind at 23%. So I think that's pretty much the consensus that Marvin Mims will be that guy. But yeah, we can put that one up on our community page as well.
Yeah, so go to Jason's Twitter. This is a good time to follow Jason. Go on over to Twitter, and you will see near the top of his Twitter feed that poll question right there. So please jump on and give us your selection on who is going to lead the Sooners in receiving yards in 2022. Good stuff. There it is. I made my vote. All right. Jason, as always, appreciate you being here, making this happen.
Absolutely. Happy to be here, Mark, as always.
Next week, everyone, should be on Friday at 11:30 Central Time. So make it on back for our Oklahoma session here for 60 minutes. Bring a friend with you, and we'll talk Oklahoma football with so much going on in recruiting and otherwise. See you next week.